Senator Fetterman, great to have you here today. I want to start with the news that's happening on the Hill, the Save America Act. Where do you stand on that?
Well, where we stand, I mean, we don't even have the Republicans on their side. And I want to thank you guys for running all those clips about Democrats to nuke the filibuster. I mean, all the Democrats, we wanted to nuke the filibuster. I mean, and I campaigned on it too. So, I mean, we were very wrong about that. To nuke the filibuster, and we should really humble ourselves and remind people that. And now we wanted to eliminate it. Now we love it. Now we love the filibuster. So that's a fact where we are now. So where I'm at, and now as your prior guest pointed out, 84% of Americans have no idea with presenting IDs to vote. So it's not like a radical idea. It's not something, and there already are many states that show basic ID. So that's where we are in the Senate. So I would never refer to the SAVE Act as like Jim Crow 2.0 or some kinds of conspiracy. But that's part of the debate that we were having here in the Senate right now. And I don't call people names or imply that it's some kinds of things, something gross about the terrible history of like Jim Crow.
So you're not there on the Save America Act specifically just yet, but you're there on the principle of voter ID. Is that what I'm hearing?
What I'm saying, though, that states, whether it's like Georgia or other states, you have ID to vote. That's not a radical idea. Now, some people can agree or disagree on that, but it is not a radical idea. And many states already do that. And Wisconsin already ratified that in their constitution. Wisconsin elected a very liberal justice, and now almost 2-1, they voted to produce ID to vote and put it in their constitution. Wisconsin, you have Baldwin, very liberal, and Johnson, very conservative. I mean, that's part of the pull and push about the American democracy.
What's up, family? So let's really slow this all the way down because a lot of people hear Save Act and they don't even know what that means. They just hear politics and they zone out. But this is actually simple when you strip the noise away. So what just happened is Republicans in the House, meaning a group of elected officials in Congress who are part of the Republican Party, passed something called the Save Act. Now, when we say passed in the House, that means one half of Congress voted yes on it. And it's like one chamber of a 2-room building agreeing on a rule. It's not fully law yet. It still has to go through the Senate and then the president's desk. But this is step one. Now, what is the SAVE Act? I'm sure you guys seen what John Fetterman just said. But to put it in simplistic terms, it would require proof of citizenship in order to register to vote in federal elections. That's it. That's the core of it. So when we say proof of citizenship, we're talking about documentation, something like a birth certificate, a U.S. passport, or naturalization papers if you became a citizen later in life. Basically, paperwork that says, yes, I'm legally a citizen of the United States. Now, let's break down why this is even being talked about. Because in the United States, only citizens are allowed to vote in federal elections. That's already the rule. That's not new. That's already the law. Non-citizens, meaning people who live here but are not legally citizens, are not allowed to vote in federal elections. So what Republicans are saying is, okay, if that's already the rule, then why not require people to show proof when they register? Their argument is basically if you need an ID to board a plane, buy alcohol, pick up certain packages, why wouldn't you need proof to participate in something as serious as a national election? That's their logic. They're framing it as common sense, and it is common sense. Like if you're signing up for a gym, they check who you are. If you're opening a bank account, they check who you are. Voting decides who runs the country. So from their perspective, requiring proof of citizenship is the bare minimum safeguard. Now let's talk about the other piece mentioned, right? The claim that non-citizens do register and vote. There have been isolated cases documented where non-citizens were found on voter rolls or voted improperly. That is a real thing in the sense that individual cases have happened. However, and this is important context, studies and investigations over the years have generally found that widespread non-citizen voting is extremely rare. And we're not talking about millions of people flooding the system. We're talking about small numbers compared to the number of votes cast nationwide. But here's where the political divide comes in. Republicans are basically arguing that even if it's rare, any amount is too much. And that's true. I got to agree with that. And the mindset is if your bank has even a tiny vulnerability that allows a few fraudulent transactions, you fix it immediately. You don't say, well, it's only a few. You patch the hole. On the other side, Democrats often argue that adding stricter documentation requirements can make it harder for eligible citizens, especially elderly people, low income individuals, or people who don't have easy access to documents to register and vote. They'll say, okay, you might think it's easy to get a birth certificate, but what if someone was born at home or their documents were lost or their name changed? So their concern isn't that non-citizens should vote. They agree that only citizens should vote, but their concern is about potential barriers for actual citizens, supposedly. Now, the red state versus blue state thing, that's political shorthand. Red states usually vote Republican, blue states usually vote Democrat. Now, the argument being made here is that red states tend to have stricter voter verification processes and that they've caught instances of improper registration because they actively audit and check. The assumption being pushed is if red states are finding some cases while actively checking, what's happening in blue states that don't check as aggressively, that's a hypothetical concern, not confirmed evidence of mass fraud, but it's a suspicion rooted in a belief that stricter oversight equals cleaner systems. So when you zone out, the whole debate isn't really about whether only citizens should vote. That's already agreed on in federal law. The real debate is about how much verification is necessary, how big the problem actually is, and whether the cure creates new problems of its own. One side sees proof of citizenship requirements as common sense security, which I tend to agree. Common sense is my first language. And comment down below if you guys agree or disagree. Let me know your guys' thoughts down in the comments below because as always, we're having a conversation. If you're new to the channel, come subscribe and join the family. And please get this video a big thumbs up. It helps push this video out to crush that YouTube algorithm. And if you're already part of the family, I appreciate you for rocking with me. And I appreciate for those who have been watching the video thus far, just for watching this video, I thank you as well. So the other side worries about unintended consequences and barriers. That's the actual core of it. So when you strip away the party labels and emotional rhetoric, it's basically a disagreement over risk tolerance. How much risk of improper voting is acceptable and how much friction is acceptable to prevent it. That's the whole fight boiled down to everyday logic. And I want you guys to see this clip of election integrity.
Any instance of a non-citizen voting dilutes the vote of eligible citizens. Local races in Louisiana can often be decided by just a handful of votes, or even one vote in some cases.
Secretary of State Nancy Landry and her team are continuing to, quote, clean out Louisiana's voter rolls and taking out registered voters who registered and voted illegally. It's part of a joint and active investigation with state and federal partners, including the FBI, Homeland Security, and Louisiana DOJ.
My office will be working with the appropriate authorities for prosecution, and I will be encouraging those authorities to file charges in every single case that the law allows.
Since May, the state has used a federal system called SAVE. It's an internet program for registered federal, state, territory, tribal, and local government bodies, verifying a person's immigration and citizenship status in the U.S. Louisiana was the first state to utilize SAVE to, quote, clean out their voter rolls. And with help from SAVE, Landry says 390 people were found to have illegally registered to vote in Louisiana. From that number, 79 of those voters actually voted in at least one of Louisiana's elections. Those voters are now off of Louisiana's voter rolls, according to Landry.
I want to be clear, non-citizens illegally registering or voting is not a systemic problem in Louisiana. I take great pride in the steps our office takes to maintain accurate voter rolls.
Election integrity has been a hot topic recently nationwide and here in Alabama. Today, the Secretary of State releasing new details from an audit to remove non-citizens from state voter rolls. The Alabama Secretary of State's office already reported last week that 186 voters had been identified as non-citizens and ineligible to vote. That figure amounts to less than 0.1% of those on Alabama voter rolls. Now, we know exactly where those individuals were registered. 21 in Madison County, for instance. That's the second highest number among all counties in the state, behind Jefferson County. But the audit also found of the 186 illegal voters, only 25 cast a ballot. Fox 54 spoke with Secretary of State Wes Allen, and he tells us these audits are worth it, even if very few illegal voters are found.
It's worth it. And even one non-citizen on our voter file, and even one non-citizen that cast a ballot is too many. The standard is high in our office. And, this process started a while back, and we signed a memorandum of understanding with DHS back last summer, and then started the process. We've got about a 3.7 million or so registered voters on our voter file here in the state of Alabama. And it took a while.
As far as the audits are concerned, Secretary Allen also tells Fox 54 that there are no plans to stop similar audits from happening in the future.
All right, family. So let's really walk through this slow, because when people start throwing around red states, blue states, voter rolls, federal access, all that political language, it sounds complicated, but it's really not if you just break it down like regular life, right? You break it all the way down. So the argument being made here is this. In red states, meaning states that usually vote Republican, like I said before, officials say they found cases of ineligible people on voter rolls when they actually audit the system. Now, pause right there. What is an audit, right? Now, audit is basically when you double check the books. So, like, if you run a business and you say, let me go through every receipt and make sure nothing shady happened, that's all an audit is. So you're reviewing the list to make sure the people registered are legally allowed to be there. Now, voter rolls just means the master list of everyone registered to vote in that state. It literally is just a database of names. So when someone says access to voter rolls, they are talking about being able to review the list and verify the people on it are eligible. Now, you might be asking, Key, why are you sitting here breaking all these simple terms down like we're slow? Well, I happen to do that because they tend to frame words mixed in and remixing it to a definition to their narrative when it comes to these propaganda mainstream liberal media outlets. So I got to break it down to really tell you guys what it is for what it is and speaking of facts. So like I said, access to voter rolls, they're basically talking about being able to review the list and verify the people on it are eligible. Now, the claim here is that red states care more about election integrity. So election integrity is just making sure elections are fair, accurate, and secure, meaning no cheating, no fake ballots, no ineligible voters. And that's the goal in theory for everybody, Republican or Democrat. And I always have said this, that why is voter ID such a big fight when it comes to the Democrats if even the Democrat supporters, their base, who solely vote Democrat, is rocking with voter ID as well, when you got 75 to 78% of black voters rocking with it, when the Democrat Party are saying that black voters and low income families is going to basically disfranchise black people, which is false, what we have seen from Abby Phillip on the ridiculous CNN panel. And I only rock with Scott Jennings, and I guarantee you a lot of people are watching that panel is because of Scott Jennings, who tend to speak in common sense terms or common sense language, which happened to be my first language. We'll get to the clip in regards of Abby Phillip and her divisive rhetoric and nonsense and nonsensical crap in a minute. But I'm saying that to say that election integrity should be a bipartisan thing. It shouldn't be a split thing. Democrats and Republicans should both want it. And it tells you a lot when one party is screaming and shouting and speaking divisive rhetoric of disfranchising black people or minority groups such as rural white liberals or black liberals, low income black family liberals or Latinos and things like that. It tells you a lot, right? And it also makes the Democrat Party suspicious, which falls into the belief of that they have basically wanted illegals here, illegal immigrants coming across America and basically coming through the border and going through the border illegally, coming in our country illegally, to obviously create another voter base, because we are seeing as legal citizens, as legal voters and legal immigrants through the nonsense and the bullcrap. And they want someone dedicated to their party no matter what. As we know that the Democratic Party is a party of handouts and taxing you to death, basically by handing out all these benefits like food stamps. And I'm all for help, genuine help. when you can prove that you actually need the help. But just to be giving out handouts and then taxing us to death for individuals who want to hold more of their monies, to live their American dream, to buy a house, to pass things down to their family members, I cannot rock with that, because that's enabling behavior, making people entitled to feel like they are entitled to these benefits when they really don't need it, which is why they want illegals over here to hand them things out like free healthcare in the name of Obamacare, right? While the Democratic Party continues to pocket themselves while also fattening the pockets of health insurance companies to control what's covered or not. And us American people are being taxed to death, paying into the system while these illegals can come over here illegally, don't have a social security number, don't pay into the system, don't pay taxes, but they get all these luxuries and privileges that the American people tax off. The American people are getting taxed um, out of their paychecks while they continue to work their behinds off. And then it creates a loyal voter base such as these illegals to continue to rock with the Democrat Party because they don't have to work. They don't have to bust their behinds to be taxed to death. They're getting everything free. So I just wanted to put that out there, which is why it shows why the Democrats are always shouting divisive rhetoric or disfranchising minority groups or making like they really care about minority groups or affordability when, one, they're taxing people to death, and two, they are the party of division and chaos when things don't go their way. When this should be a bipartisan agreement and should be split, Republicans and Democrats should be coming together to uphold election integrity for the American taxpayer and the legal immigrant who pay taxes and also have been integrated and came a part of upholding American culture. Why is that such a debate? Because the Democrats ain't right and they know it. So when you look at it, right, nobody publicly says they want cheating, right? Because it would look bad for the Democrats. But the disagreement is about how much checking is necessary and who should be doing the checking. Now, the argument being pushed here is if red states would supposedly have fewer undocumented immigrants or illegals, as people say, are still finding issues when they audit, then imagine what they might find in large blue states like New York City or California that have much larger populations overall and larger immigrant populations. And that's a hypothetical argument. It's basically saying if we're catching fish in a small pond, what would we catch in the ocean? And that's the analogy here. But here's where we have to separate suspicion from confirmed evidence. There's no publicly verified data showing massive numbers of non-citizens voting in states like California or New York. But multiple studies over the years, including conservative-led investigations, have generally found that widespread non-citizen voting is rare. Not non-existent in individual cases. It's not non-existent in individual cases, but rare at scale. Now, with this claim that blue states aren't letting the federal government access voter rolls, right? This needs context. And when you look at it, these Democrat states won't even allow the Trump administration and the federal government to have access to who they are giving food stamps to, right? They're refusing to give up the data, which says a lot and is very telling with these blue states. Only the blue states are refusing to give up the data, right? So states control their own elections, right? The Constitution gives states primary authority over how they run them. So when there's tension between a presidential administration and certain states over voter data access or food stamp access, it's usually about legal authority, privacy concerns, or political mistrust, right? And it can come off as of hiding a crime, fraud, right? Look what we see in Minnesota with the Somali immigrants, fake daycares, fake autism centers. So when you look at that, in 2017, when the Trump administration created the Presidential Advisory Commission on Election Integrity and asked states for very detailed voter data, several states, both Republican and Democrat, Republicans cooperated, but Democrats refused or limited what they provided, citing privacy laws and concerns about federal overreach. And when you look at that, if you don't have anything to hide, you shouldn't be scared of any inspection, right? And then you have the other perspective is we already have state level oversight, especially the argument from the Democrats. And we don't trust a politically motivated federal request. That's the pushback. So it becomes it comes off more of hiding something and hiding fraud, and they try to make it like as if Trump is just this authoritarian, he's Nazi, he's Hitler, and rather the request is neutral or political. So when I show you guys the first clip of John Fetterman, right? He's a Democrat senator from Pennsylvania. So when someone says, right, he does have common sense on this issue and tends to be the most common sense Democrat, what they're usually referring to is that he is and has at times taken positions that are more moderate or not fully aligned with the progressive wing of his party, the far left radical lunatics, Democrats. So in politics, when someone breaks slightly from their party's dominant position, people on the other side highlight that as proof that even they know this makes sense. And it's true, right? Rather he votes for or against something like the SAVE Act would depend on how he balances concerns about voter access versus voter security. Now, the framing of CNN melting down, media panels debate these issues because they see political consequences. When you look at it, right, commentators criticizing the SAVE Act, and their argument usually isn't, we want non-citizens voting, but indirectly, that's basically what they're voting for. So their argument is that requiring documentary proof of citizenship at the point of registration could complicate the process for eligible voters who don't readily have those documents available, right? That's what Abby Phillip and the Democrat Party is bringing to the table when it comes to the, news night with Abby Phillip on the panel on CNN. And when you look at that, some people birth certificates are stored in another state. They go on to say, for example, millions of Americans don't have passports. This is what Abby Phillip is saying. We're going to get into the clip in a minute, but they argue that it could lower participation amongst legal voters, and supporters respond by saying if you care enough to vote, you can get your documents, which the Republicans, and I agree, if you care enough to vote, that's basic responsibility. I mentioned the examples with car registration and things like that. So again, the real divide isn't about whether citizens should vote. Everyone agrees on that. But it's about whether the scale, potential, and proper voting justifies stricter federal documentation requirements, and whether states refusing certain federal requests equals secrecy or just a dispute or over jurisdiction. So think of it like this. If a school district says we already checked student IDs at the door, and the federal government says we want to come in and run our own check, which the school district usually gets money from the federal government, which is given to their state, right? In their state, which is then the governor in that state tends to disperse the monies to the school district on a certain amounts that they give. The federal government just cuts the check to that state and to states, right? So some people would say, good, double security. Others will say, why are you stepping into local authority, such as the state and the governor, when they are handling it? And that's the tension here. So when you strip away the heat and the partisan language, what you're really looking at is a fight over trust in state systems, trust in federal oversight, trust in how big the actual problem is. One side assumes that stricter access and stricter ID equals cleaner elections. The other side assumes the problem is small and that the extra layers may create new issues, supposedly. And that's the heart of the debate, minus the shouting. So let's get into it.
Tonight, in Donald Trump's quest to overhaul American elections, the president says he sees a path forward. In a vote that fell largely on party lines this week, House Republicans and one Democrat passed the Save America Act, which would impose strict new voter identification rules, including documentary proof of citizenship in person for voter registration.
It's the Save America Act, and the Democrats are against it. I heard one of them say, we will stop the Save America Act. No, we're trying to save America. And it has to do with largely voting. And basically, it's got three very simple points. It's got voter ID, photo ID, but voter ID with a photo, right? It's got the confirmation of U.S. citizenship. And then you have no mail-in ballots. And there would be no mail-in ballots, very important. That will assure the security of our crooked elections. We have crooked elections.
And just to be clear, the SAVE Act does not include a ban on mail-in ballots, despite what the president just said there in that clip. But the other part of it has been more controversial. It's not just a voter ID bill or law that they would like to pass. It's also something that would require you to show up in person with some proof of your citizenship. And no, your real ID wouldn't count. No, you could not just show up with your driver's license. You would have to bring your passport or your birth certificate. So that's what's made this controversial. And I think it's a real question, a debate to have in this country about whether that is even necessary, Joe.
Yeah, it's great to have a debate, but we have to remember that 80% of the people have a general understanding about what voter ID is. They have an understanding that, voter ID at some form is in about 25 states. I personally am sick of sort of the circles that we always run, where Republicans are saying, this many cases of voter fraud have happened. Democrats will say, well, that's not indicative of, massive voter fraud. I want to hear where in those 23 or 24, 25 states that have voter ID laws in place already, where people are required to show an ID, where is the massive studies of people being disenfranchised? In fact, it's the opposite is true. You remember, I think it was 2021, the MLB All-Star Game pulled out of Georgia because Georgia was implementing voter ID and it was going to disenfranchise voters. The number of gubernatorial voters went from the year before 1.1 million to 1.9. Bakari, your state, I looked it up. South Carolina, because I know they're a voter ID state. They went from 56% voter turnout in the presidential year in 2012 to 61% in 2020 and then like 65% in 2024. Those are more people voting in states that have passed voter ID laws. So this is why I think the majority of Americans reasonably can look at it and say this is a good thing.
You just wasted about 3.
All right, so let's slow this all the way down and unpack what's being said here, because this is where the conversation gets spicy and people start throwing around words like voter suppression, IQ tests, everybody shouldn't vote. And if you don't break that down carefully, it could turn into some noise, right? Because that's what I'm getting from it. Right. So the argument being made is this. When Democrats say voter ID laws or proof of citizenship requirements are voter suppression, the counter argument is that getting an ID, when it comes to the Republican side, is getting an ID or getting access to your birth certificate is not some impossible mission. And it's not. Right. Because the logic is if you can function in society, you should be able to obtain basic documents. Now, when it comes to this voter suppression would mean just creating rules that make it harder for certain groups of eligible people to vote. That's an accusation, right? So, for example, if a state passed a law saying you can only vote between 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, critics would say that suppresses working people who can't leave their jobs. So when Democrats say voter ID laws are suppression, what they mean is they believe those requirements disproportionately affect certain groups like low-income families, elderly citizens, or people who move frequently, who have more difficulty obtaining documentation. That's their argument. Now, when you look at it from the Republican side, the counter argument is different, right? Because I'm saying if someone cannot handle the responsibility of obtaining an ID or basic citizenship documents, maybe they shouldn't be participating in something as serious as deciding who runs the country. You better make it your business, the same way you will make it your business to make sure you have ID and proof of citizenship to work a job, right? To get on that plane, to make sure you enjoy your trip to Costa Rica or wherever you go. You know what I'm saying? So that just came to my head, example wise for vacation. But you get where I'm going. Or Jamaica, man, So what I'm saying when you look at all of that is that whole thing, that voting as a responsibility that requires a minimum of level of effort and engagement, right? You know what I'm saying? It's like saying if you can't fill out the paperwork to get a driver's license, should you really be driving? And that's the analogy being implied here. Now, here's where we need to clarify something important, right? Because the U.S. Constitution does not require an intelligence test to vote, right? But in fact, historically, literacy tests and so-called IQ tests were used in the past, especially in the Jim Crow South, to block, Americans from voting. Those tests were intentionally designed to be unfair. Because of that history, anything that sounds like an IQ test for voting raises alarm for a lot of people. That doesn't mean my argument is identical to those old policies, but that historical context explains why the phrase itself is, I guess, controversial. But all I'm saying is not an actual IQ test, but just common sense. This is a common sense thing to do, and just part of American culture to have identification, right? To show proof that you say who you are. And also it holds that accountability component, right? Because people scam all the time. But if you have identification, we can prove that you say who you are. Doesn't that prevent the crime? Common sense, right? Common sense. So this whole thing, just to get to the, meats and potatoes of thing. Bakari Sanders is going to say that this is going to cost states more money like South Carolina. And I want to get to that part.
Minutes, and we're not talking about voter ID. So the
the fundamental thing of the SAVE Act is requiring proof of who you are.
That's two different things. So voter ID means that you have to have a driver's license or the real ID that you use.
Yep.
That doesn't count under the SAVE Act. So the SAVE Act, I just want to tell you so the viewers understand, means that you have to have proof of citizenship. You also can't do those things online. So 42 states out of the 50, since we're not quoting numbers of states, their entire online voter registration systems are going to be tossed out the window. That's going to cost states like South Carolina money. The other thing is there are 52% of Americans that are registered to vote right now literally do not have access to an unexpired passport. That's important. 11% of registered voters right now don't have access to proof of citizenship. That's important. Now, we're just talking about people, black, white, and otherwise, poor folk, whatever, in that number. If you want to talk about the discriminatory effect, we're talking about poor people who don't have access to those things, to be able to get to the DMV, to be able to get to places where you can get a new passport.
Our government expects a lot of us. Every single year, every single person is expected to file their taxes, something that is very complicated.
You can do it online.
Have to outsource. During COVID,
but you can do it online.
People had to go and get a vaccine in person. I went twice. I had to carry my
What does that have to do with voting?
I had to carry my little card around.
No, we're way off track on this. No,
we're not. The government expects a lot of things of people for taxes.
Can I just explain to you the difference?
Can
I tell you the difference?
Can
I tell you the difference?
Why can't we
Can I just
expect
explain to you the
something
fundamental
far
difference?
less onerous?
Yes.
Proving
Please.
who you are.
Would you
The
correct
difference
her,
is
please?
you listed a lot of things. You listed a lot of things in this country that are privileges. We're not talking about privileges. Voting is a constitutional right in this.
Taxes are a privilege?
Yes, voting is a constitutional right. Tell me in the enumeration of the Constitution where it says you must pay this X, Y, Z. We're not even talking about that. You're talking about restaurants. You're talking about vaccinations. You're talking about all these things. You're talking about driving. No, we're talking about the right to vote.
Things where the security is actually much less stringent and much more sacred than voting.
Can I ask you a question?
Wait a second.
Let me ask you a question.
Can someone vote by affidavit?
Joe.
They can. So even if you don't have the right ID, you can still vote by affidavit. And
let me ask you a question. Why can't we ask the government to do what they have the ability to do, which is to verify people's citizenship? Why is the onus on the person and not the government, who is the keeper of the records? Why?
Look, if you have to show some proof and then the government can match it against the database, I'm fine with that. I don't have a problem with that.
That's exactly how the system works right now.
Abby.
Right now, hold on.
Yeah.
Right now in the United States of America, this has been true for 25 years. When you're applying for a vote to register to vote, you have to produce either an ID or a social security number. The government is then
not in this state, not in New York.
The government. That's a federal law. That's a federal law. Every state. Okay. When you're registering,
you don't need an ID here.
You
can give any.
Did you hear what I said?
So you can give any number.
Hold on, Joe.
You can give any
Listen,
when you register.
Listen, Joe.
I mean, when you
are registering
to register to vote the first time.
Saying. When you register to vote for the first time, you have to supply either an ID or a social security number. The government is the keeper of the records of who is eligible to vote and who is not, who is a citizen and who is not. They then keep a database, that's also part of the law, and they check against the database. I also think we should just keep in mind here.
I want to stop it right there, right? When you look at this, right, the idea that requiring proof of citizenship is going to cost state money, or this is somehow an unbearable burden you're trying to get at, right? Every state already spends money running elections. They print ballots, they pay poll workers, they maintain voting machines, they secure buildings, they update software, they maintain databases. Elections are not free. So we're already spending billions nationwide to run elections, then investing additional money to strengthen verification systems. It's not outrageous. It's like this. If you build a house and you already spent $300,000 building it, Are you really going to say that adding $2,000 security system is too expensive? That's the analogy, right? The counterpoint of this is that states operate on budgets. And when federal laws impose new requirements, states have to pay for that, sometimes have to pay for implementation. And that's a real logistical issue, right? But the thing is that safeguarding legitimacy is worth transitional cost. So, and it doesn't have to happen overnight with this process, but there can be a phase in period. But security shouldn't be rejected just because it costs something, right? And it blows my mind because they'll say 11% don't have access to proof of citizenship claim. That statistically usually refers to surveys showing a portion of Americans don't have ready access to documents like passports or birth certificates. Ready access doesn't mean impossible to get it. It often means they don't currently possess a physical copy in their home. So in 2026, most of these documents, like Bakari Seller said, can be requested online through a state's vital records office. A birth certificate can typically be ordered from the county or state you were born. And passport can be renewed online if eligible. So the argument they're making, this is not climbing Mount Everest, right? It's paperwork. And paperwork is part of being an adult citizen. So sitting here arguing that small barriers, fees, internet access, transportation, time off work can disproportionately affect low-income individuals. For example, if replacing a birth certificate costs $25 to $50 and someone is living paycheck to paycheck, that's not nothing. If someone doesn't have stable housing or lost documents in a disaster, that process could be more complicated. But at the end of the day, how are you going to get anything done if you don't have your documentation? Everything has a process. You are not above the program. You are not above the process, right? So all that discriminatory effect argument is weak because these obstacles are manageable. They're not insurmountable. And framing them as impossible is basically exaggeration here, right? And the right to voting in federal elections is a constitutional right for citizens who meet eligibility requirements: age, citizenship status, residency, and not being disqualified under specific conditions like certain felony rules, depending on the state. But every right in society has verification attached to it. And the right to board a plane, you show ID. That's my core argument. If voting is a right reserved for citizens, then logically there must be a system to verify who qualifies. Otherwise, the rule is meaningless, right? And when you look at that, with millions of undocumented immigrants, people living in the U.S. without legal immigration status, there must be mechanisms to ensure they cannot participate in federal elections. Federal law already prohibits non-citizens from voting in federal elections. That is established law. So when you look at it, and the political tension coming in is over enforcement and scope, because there have been some cities like New York City that attempted to allow non-citizens to vote in certain local elections, not federal ones, but those efforts often been challenged in court. Supporters, look, it's been argued that local government should decide local voting rules for municipal matters. But when you look at that, what blurs the line between citizenship and political power, right? Because when you look at that, some Democrats believe that constitutional protections extend broadly to non-citizens, and that's not right. The part that has legal grounding is the Constitution protects persons in many amendments, not just citizens, which is why non-citizens have due process, they want to say, right? This is the belief of the Democrat liberal mind, right? But citizens, non-citizens, that does not mean at the end of the day, non-citizens have the right to vote in federal elections. There is no constitutional provision granting that. So when you look at that and you see the intent of the Democrat Party and non-citizens voting federally, and the motivation behind it, and the illegals coming over here across the border, with open borders and all that from Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, that is party and power over the American people and the rights that should be upheld, let alone the law.
The Trump administration has already asked for voter records from a bunch of states. They got 50 million voter records. These are largely Republican states where they've got voter ID. They looked at the records, and guess what they found? They found almost no actual evidence of fraud. However, even if you, let's just take what they did find, out of 50 million records, they found 10,000 that raised flags. So even in the states where there's voter ID, they're still finding flags, not proof of fraud, but it's also, when they look even deeper, a lot of times these are false flags. These are people who actually are registered properly to vote, that the system is flagging.
Abby, does the SAVE Act
So the Trump administration has had a whole year to look at this. They've looked, 50 million records. They've found virtually nothing, 0.02%.
And yet 80% of the public
something that
says
is
that you're not the
anomalous,
right
not even
position.
fraud.
Right? But just answer one question. If someone doesn't have an ID under the SAVE Act, are they permitted to vote affidavit, via an affidavit? Are they permitted to vote?
But Joe,
Can they vote?
Joe, I think
the answer is yes. This is so overblown.
It is not overblown,
If someone cannot produce the ID,
Joe,
they can go to their poll site.
I don't even think you have a command of the issue.
Well,
Right now, you don't. You're talking about voter ID, and that's not. We're talking about the SAVE Act specifically. So
If you don't have the qualifications to vote under the SAVE Act, you can vote via affidavit.
We've
It's
heard
permitted in the
a
law.
lot from you, so let me just try to weigh in.
Okay, sure, yeah.
Less than half of the American people have what it would take to comply with
that's
the
a problem.
SAVE
We gotta figure that
Act.
out.
That is a huge problem, exactly. So, and you think about married women, like we were talking about during the break, who, if they change their last name when they get married, that's going to be.
What a woman
let me finish my
was.
point. Let me have the
I'm
professional.
glad to hear their concern.
Now we're talking about this is ridiculous. Let me have the professional courtesy to finish my point.
Stay on the point.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Please, thank you. Anyway, this is a problem that is in search, or a solution that's in search of a problem. There is not some outpouring of undocumented immigrants trying to vote, and that's what this is all about. If more than half the people do not have the documents to support this act, it is clearly an intimidation tactic. We heard from Donald Trump talking about nationalizing elections.
I have to stop her here because when she says this right here.
Tactic. We heard from Donald Trump talking about nationalizing elections. We've heard from Steve. If more than half the people do not have the documents to support this act, it is clearly an intimidation tactic. We heard from Donald Trump talking about change their last name when they get married.
That's going to be what a woman
Let me finish my point.
was.
Let me have the professional.
I'm glad to hear their concern.
Now we're talking about this is ridiculous. Let me have the professional courtesy to finish my point.
Stay on the point.
Yeah,
Thank you.
please. Thank you. Anyway, this is a problem that is in search, or a solution that's in search of a problem. There is not some outpouring of undocumented immigrants trying to vote, and that's what.
That's false. Because let's be honest about something else. We've heard Democrats argue over and over that constitutional rights apply to non-citizens in many contexts. Many contexts. We've heard that. Due process, legal protection, all of that. So when people question whether some Democrats are comfortably expanding political rights further, that question doesn't come from nowhere. In some liberal cities, there have been pushes to allow non-citizens to vote in local elections. That happened, and that's not made up. So when people say, "Don't worry, they'll never go further," critics are like, based on what? At the end of the day, the argument is here. Here is simple: verification is not oppression. Requiring proof of eligibility is not discrimination. It's structure. And if a party consistently resists stronger verification, people are going to question the motive. That's just human nature. At the end of the day, that's like raising my child. My child is going to thrive off of structure. If I let it go willy-nilly because he have the privileges for the simple fact of that's not in his best interest to protect the simple fact that he needs to learn life skills, that he needs to know how to manage, that he needs to know how to create a sense of routine when he needs to adapt in environments. Let's say, for example, if he go away to college and he becomes a young adult and he lives on his own and do his own thing, that's fine. But there has to be some structure upheld to handle your business. At the end of the day, it's no different when it comes to voting. This is common sense stuff, man.
This is all about. If more than half the people do not have the documents to support this act, It is clearly an intimidation tactic. We heard from Donald Trump talking about nationalizing elections. We've heard from Steve Bannon, who went to prison, Trump's advisor, saying they're going to have ICE patrols at election points. All of this is meant to limit the amount of people to vote. To Abby's point, if you wanted to ensure every American could vote, then the government, who we should expect things from our government,
Tiffany,
not about what the government
this is the same argument that people made about voter
could
ID laws in all of the states.
people to vote
Tell
at
me
the
which
age of
state
18
had
or
less
when
votes.
they're naturalized. If you want to encourage more people to vote,
Tiffany,
that's how you do it.
This is the same argument. This is the same argument that people used in every one of the 20-something states that have voter ID. Just tell me which state implemented some form of voter ID, voter registration rules.
And we still don't know. We still don't know why they were messing with Fulton County.
There is not one of those.
It goes right back to what Abby was just talking about. If they have researched all of this and they have found minimal pieces, most of these.
The minimus is the legal word.
Right. And so my point is that if this is really a pretext to suppress voting, then everybody at this table should be concerned about that.
You're making that
because
up.
The democracy.
No,
I'm not.
80% of America is on my side.
Oh, no. I don't know what 80% you're talking about.
Not often that happens at this table, but this time 80% of America is on the side of voter
democracy depends on people voting.
Joe is right. 83% of Americans, according to a Gallup poll, this was back in October, say that they agree that Americans should be required to provide proof of citizenship. We're going to continue this conversation after the break, but I think it's worth noting.
All right, family. I'm going to just leave it there, right? Because when you look at this, and let's talk about how the system actually works, because this is where people get misled. Abby Phillip, as you see on the screen, and others will talk like there's already this airtight federal system double checking everyone in real time when they register to vote. That's not how this works. Elections in America are decentralized. That means the federal government does not run them day to day. The states do, period. Each state maintains its own voter rolls. And that's just a list of registered votes. The federal government sets broad rules, like only citizens can vote in federal elections. But the states are the ones actually processing registrations and maintaining the list. So when someone registers, what happens? In most places, you fill out a form. You put your name, address, date of birth, maybe your driver's license number, last 4 digits of your social, and there are database checks to confirm your identity. But identity verification is not the same thing as citizenship verification. That's the key point. Just because your name matches a driver's license record doesn't mean the system has independently confirmed your citizenship in real time. I mean, look at California. They were giving out driver license, let alone CDL license, to illegal immigrants. So in many cases, what confirmed citizenship is legally a question on the form that says, are you a citizen? Yes or no. You check the box and you sign it under penalty or perjury. Meaning if you lie, you could go to jail. That's the system. There is no nationwide real-time federal citizenship database that instantly approves or denies you the moment you submit. You hit submit. So that doesn't exist in the way people pretend it does. So when Republicans say they want stronger verification, like actual proof of citizenship, that's because right now in many places, the backbone of the system is basically an honor system backed by legal penalties. So now when Democrats say fraud is rare, okay, but Republicans are saying rare doesn't mean impossible. And rare doesn't mean we shouldn't tighten the system. They'll prefer a structure where eligibility is confirmed before registration is finalized, not just after the fact if someone gets caught. But here's the catch. Because elections are state run, any stronger federal involvement will require states to share more data. And blue states don't want to do that. This is my point again. They'll argue privacy. They'll argue federal overreach. But from the Republican perspective, the resistance, it looks suspicious, right? And anybody that's a typical everyday regular life American citizen will see it as suspicion too, because if you're confident in your system, why not allow stronger cross-checking? So the core argument is complicated. Right now, citizenship verification at registration is often self-attested. Republicans want stronger proof up front. Democrats resist expanding federal overreach, and that's the tension here. So the bigger picture is Republican-led states actively push voter ID laws, cleaning up voter rolls, cross-checking records. They're saying, let's tighten this up. Democrat-led states, generally speaking, are more resistant to adding new verification requirements. That's a divide, right? And where Democrats say voter ID is suppression, Republicans respond, where's the proof? Show us the massive drop in turnout caused solely by ID laws. Because in many states that implemented voter ID, turnout didn't collapse. People adjusted. They got IDs, life went on. So the argument becomes less about evidence and more about philosophy. Here's the philosophy. Did you raise security standards before there's a massive crisis, or do you wait until something blows up? Think about cybersecurity. A company doesn't wait for hackers to drain every account before installing firewalls. You don't wait for your house to get robbed before locking the door. You don't say, well, we haven't got robbed yet, so let's just leave everything open. You put standards in place so it never becomes a disaster in the first place. That's the point. So this is common sense, though, because elections are state run. We are relying on each state to enforce the rules properly. And if some states resist additional scrutiny or federal access, people are going to question that. And we have every right to as the American taxpayer, not because there's proven massive fraud everywhere, because inconsistent enforcement creates doubt. And in elections, confidence matters almost as much as the outcomes. So when you look at all of this, and critics say Democrats happen to resist stronger safeguards. And it's the truth because it benefits them politically. That's a claim about motive, right? And that's the motive. The argument is that looser verification could potentially benefit one party if ineligible voters lead a certain way. And we've seen that. We're seeing the proof happen in real time, and it's going to come out more and more and more. I'm just waiting for the proof to come out. Why do you think Fulton County actually got raided by the FBI and federal investigation? And you've seen Tusley Gabbard there, that's head of the Central Intelligence Department. Obviously, because we have foreigners obviously making it their business to involve and basically sway our American or our federal elections, right? And that can be dangerous because now, how can we have not only cheating happen when it comes to voting, but the elections being stolen, the 2020 election, when in this case, with potentially happening with Donald Trump and Joe Biden, potentially that the election got taken from Donald Trump, which is still rolling out, and we'll see the facts as it comes out. Right now, and it's alleged. I'm gonna put that out there. But for that to happen, and to see Democrats panicking like that, oh, well, they took voters or polls or votes from 2020. Well, if it's not a real problem, then why the hell you care? It's back from 2020, damn it. Brings very much suspicion for the American people, American taxpayers, especially like me. It brings very much concerns for you to be panicking like that. Something ain't right. So Democrats want to deny that, right? That it doesn't sway in their favor to stay in power, which is why this thing of fraud and illegals and all that coming to America and the borders not being secure and all of that. But it's very telling, right, that they're panicking so much to defend this nonsense, let alone the most anti-American things. So protecting, they're saying protecting access and civil rights, but it doesn't seem much so, because if you look at it, when you're consistently blocking tighter verification, it looks like you don't want the system examined too closely. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Hope you guys enjoyed this video and got some value from it, which is my goal. Love you guys. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.